Hello, and welcome to a video in which I'm talking about a game that I'm making and how to play it. In the next 2 to 4 hours of my life, I'm going to try to explain succinctly every single rule for Legacy and Saga. And then I'm going to package that up into a couple of succinct little videos for all you dummies to listen to and eat up. Yum, yum, yum. So what is this game? Should I sit down over here? Legacy and Saga is a game about stories. The most important mechanics in this game are about capturing story, or I think of them sometimes as accumulating story. So as you play through this game, we are trying to build story. The very first thing to know is that everyone's experience with this game is going to be different. Legacy and Saga can do a lot of different things. And depending on the game that I'm running or the game that other people might eventually run, you might be using different aspects of the system. Legacy and Saga sections off different categories of the game, and each of these different categories can work more or less on its own. But enough about this stuff. We'll get into it later. Let's talk about the rules, baby. This is a D20 based system. Almost every role you're going to do in this game, 80-90% of the roles, are something and a D20. And then with all of those D20 rolls, what we're adding are other dice. And these dice work on a gradient. And we move through this gradient depending on different conditions that are applied to us in the game, whether it be circumstantial or mechanically. And as you move up and down this gradient, I call it ascending and descending. So anytime you pick up some kind of skill or something you can do in the game, in most cases, you're going to be rolling a D4. And as conditions apply that improve your chances of succeeding on a roll, that D4 goes to a D6, a D8, and so on until you get to a D12. But that works in the opposite direction. If things hamper your character, if they hamper your chances of succeeding, you go from a D4 to nothing to a negative D4 and so on to a negative D12. Now, when paired with a D20, when we get a nat 20 or a nat 1, that also affects the outcome of our dice. So it's very important whenever you make a roll with a D20 and other dice, roll the D20 first. First thing you do, roll the D20, and then figure out what other dice you're going to roll. Because nat 20s ascend your dice and nat 1s descend your dice. This is very important because sometimes people are rolling dice together and one person's rolling a D20 and people have already rolled their dice and then the D20 gets rolled and then everyone needs to redo the thing. Develop practice. If you're playing this game, always roll the D20 first. When we roll a nat 20 specifically, we add 1 for each dice we're adding to the D20. So let's say we're rolling 1D20 plus 3D4, we roll a nat 20. Now we are rolling 3d6 plus 3, 1 for each dice. Now, once we get to a d12 and we have things that are affecting our dice and pushing them beyond the d12, the scale actually does continue to move up into d14, 16, and so on. But then we get to something called dice breaking. And that's where we take the total value of the dice. So 16, 18, whatever, and we break it down into smaller components. So an 18 would become a D10 and a D8. We always break it into as few components as possible, but you can be flexible with how you break it up. A D14 could be a D8 and a D6 or a D10 and a D4. It does not make much of a difference. From here, we have a series of base systems. These are a series of rules that can be added and taken away that provide a structure to the game. These are the fundamentals of what we're working with that we add other things onto, which I'll talk about those other things later. Don't get ahead of me now. It will be in a different video, so you can get ahead if you want. Let's talk about health. This is a freaking adventuring game. We have health. We're worried about getting hit if we want to be. And we have, like some other TTRPGs, a dice that represents our health. So if we are level 3 or tier 3, we have a dice that relates to each of those tiers. Important language also, maybe I can throw in now. Tiers is the stand-in for levels in Legacy and Saga. As we gain skills and more active mechanics, everything is broken up into tiers. And that is the logic that guides that aspect of the game. So there's health dice. Everyone starts at a D8. And then other aspects of our game affect whether that dice ascends or descends. And however many tiers that a character has, they have typically an equal number of health dice. And their total health is the maximum value of those collective dice. So say our health dice is a D8 still, and we have 4 tiers. It's 4 times 8, so 32. We have 32 hit points. By and large, this is pretty straightforward, but there are some really specific cases in which health gets a little bit more complicated. We're not going to worry about that, so shut the fuck up. Now, health in Legacy and Saga, like in many games, is vague. The game doesn't tell you what it's supposed to represent, but I generally think of it as energy or durability. When we reach 0 health, it doesn't mean that we are knocked unconscious, but we are in more danger, because in this game we are at risk of getting injured. Injuries are one of the mechanics in the game that negatively affect our dice. There are 3 kinds of injuries: minor, major, and severe. Each one affects your dice in a different way, and then you are further affected by the flavor of injury you get. So having a cut versus a burn might provide different effects for your character. Now, a severe injury always sets a death timer, and it changes depending on and that death timer depends on the kind of injury you get. So a severe cut might give you a couple of minutes. A severe burn might give you a couple of days. So if we take any kind of injury while we are also at 0 hit points, we immediately get a permanent injury. A regular injury descends all of our dice. A permanent injury will take one specific skill, one thing we can do, and it will say you can't do that as well anymore. So in the overall image of a character's health in Legacy and Saga, we are worried both about managing injuries and managing our hit point pool. And if we have a lot of problems on one end, we want to make sure that the other end is okay. Luckily, we have what are called buffers, and a buffer will reduce the impact of an injury. So if I have 1 buffer and I take a major injury, if I have 1 buffer and I take a severe injury, I can reduce that severe injury to a major, or a major to a minor, or a minor to nothing. But buffers are also a limited resource. They don't come back very quickly in this game. In fact, nothing comes back very quickly in this game. The pace to this game is meant to be much slower than certain other tabletop role-playing games. Speaking of pace, let's talk about resting and recovery. There are 3 kinds of rests in Legacy and Saga: a night's rest, a day's rest, and a week's rest. And different things are recovered on each of these rests. A night's rest takes 10 hours, with 8 of it being sleeping and 2 of it being relaxing and eating. A day's rest is a full day. A week's rest is a week. Most parts of the game will tell you what comes back on which kind of rest. So for example, buffers, you get 1 back each week's rest. Pretty scary. So buffers are a very precious resource. Our health pool and our injuries are also healed partially on rests. When we take damage to our health, and for some reason we have not healed after an hour, we get what's called temporary health. So our hit point pool sets at its current number, and you can only heal from there from resting. Similarly, with an injury, if you have not healed an injury before a night's rest, the injury will set, and now nothing else can heal it besides just resting. Some of the logic with injuries and magic and injuries setting is that when you try to magically mend something, the body gets confused. And what that creates in the game is no easy fixes. When we get an injury, it's not just, oh, let me heal you. It's something that we have to be very careful about. Anyways, rests. Each kind of rest lets you heal different amounts, depending on if you're using standard rules or if you are using food. There is an optional rule, and technically all the rules in Legacy and Saga are optional, but one of the rules involves your character having to eat enough to both sustain themselves and then heal. And so the way this works is that food has to translate into health. Food will be represented by different dice. The cumulative totals of those dice will let you roll your health dice. So what the fuck does that mean? Let's say your health dice is a D10. We are looking to gain a total value of 10 from the food that we have. So we could have a D10 or a D6 and a D4. The total value of that food is 10, which means we have 1 health dice. We then take that health dice and roll it and heal that much. So food dice, we're concerned with the dice value. A D6 is 6, a D8 is 8, a D12 is 12. And then we're looking for numbers equal to the value of our health dice to then roll that dice. I'm sure they're very confusing. That's why food is an optional rule. People who get it, get it. People who don't or can ask questions. Moving on. 2 more things in health and body. There are also diseases in this game. At this stage of development, they are more of an idea than a fully fleshed out thing. In order for me to implement diseases, I have to come up with a bunch of diseases and how they work and how they're transmitted. But the idea with injuries and diseases is that you have to heal from them through your rests. If you don't heal from an injury that you take after a certain number of days, as described by the rules of the game, it will become a permanent injury. And if you don't heal from the disease, if you don't beat it within a certain amount of time, you'll also get a permanent injury or maybe a stacking effect where the disease becomes worse until it kills you or gives you a permanent injury. But a lot of the healing parts of the game dive into this sort of survival aspect where we really don't want to get hurt. And when we do get hurt, we really have to slow down. Otherwise, we're taking very large risks. Last thing, light level and vision style. There are a bunch of different levels of light. Blinding light, daylight, bright light, light, impeded light. Bunch of things. And then depending on the vision style you have, your dice will be affected in different conditions of light. So with normal vision, something that a human would have, you can see in daylight and light, but anything outside of those 2 bounds, our dice descend when we're trying to do something. So if I'm in dim light, I can't see as well. I might be descending my dice trying to fight something. With this first set of rules, the health and body rules, everything I've been talking about for I don't fucking know how long, what it wants to get out of the game is to make you question violence. If someone comes up to you and has a knife, in another TTRPG, you might take a little cut and then heal up your hit points and be fine. But in this game, you could be expending a resource. If they give you an injury, you're at least using a buffer. If you don't have any buffers to use, now you're going to have to deal with that injury. The implied gameplay from most of these rules is one that requires the player to negotiate with the world, requires players to think about how they engage in violence when they do engage with violence, if they want to engage with violence at all. It's not something that the characters can do infinitely, resting every day and getting all their resources back and then fighting God. Every person could be a threat. Implication is a very important principle of design. The game doesn't tell you how a character should react to anything, but the game structures consequence so that the player has a reaction and can roleplay that as their character. Which brings me into our role-playing systems. And you might be thinking, and if you have no idea who I am and you're seeing this video, you might be thinking, don't tell me what the fuck to do with roleplay. How dare you? That's not what these systems are. These are not prescriptive. These are implied rules. So for example, the first one, reputation. In this game, there's a mechanic that helps us track reputation. Imagine if you are playing a game and you help out a small town from a goblin encampment. You go to the general store and you say, hey, can I have a discount? And the guide and the GM says, make a roll for it. And then you kind of roll poorly and you don't have a good bonus. Oh crap, that sucks. And also kind of doesn't make sense. So reputation intends to amend things like that. Another big principle in design in Legacy and Saga is the word reasonable. A lot of mechanics structure out a logic so that we can reason through things, or we can help reason through things. So reputation starts at a D4, goes up to a D12. We can gain up to 5 reputation dice. And all of these dice are the same value. So you either have 5d4, 5d6, 5d12, or whatever. You cannot have 2d4 and 2d12. Reputation is circumstantial. So you might gain reputation in that one small village, but you go to the next village and your reputation probably has not made it that far. So the tiers of reputation actually help describe those discrepancies. A D4 is something very local, like a village. A D6 might be a town or a couple of villages. A D10 is known across the land, and a D12 is like king status. Not just the people, but the important people in a land know and are affected by a D12 of reputation. Our next role-playing mechanic is called Edge. A lot of Legacy and Saga is about accumulating different consequences to your character. We take permanent injuries, as well as other yet-to-be-mentioned permanent effects. But it is not all downsides, because every time we take a permanent effect, we gain what's called an edge dice. An edge dice scales with our tiers in the game. Now, we haven't talked about skills and skill trees and total tiers yet, but edge dice start at D4s like everything else, and they go way beyond that. So an edge dice is a limited resource based off of our character's cumulative experiences that we can use for anything. Am I getting hit and my armor isn't high enough? Edge dice, increase that. Do I want to charm someone? Edge dice. Do I want to have more magic? Edge dice. Do I want to take away from an enemy's roll? Edge dice. Our edge dice also come back on a week's rest. So we have to be very careful in how we use these dice. They have implied weight. They have implied importance because of their limited use. And we can permanently lose edge dice. This is a game that is punishing but doesn't want to punish. It wants to tell a story. So we're constantly looking for ways out of consequence that help the story move forward. And one of those ways is called compromise. In a situation in which your characters are in trouble and you do not have the mechanical support to get out, whether it be something that is initiated through the characters, if that makes sense, or something that is initiated from the players to the guide, we can sacrifice our edge dice, one of our edge dice, to create a compromise in a situation, in one of these dangerous situations. And we are allowed to move on, but we have now sacrificed something. We also have late revelation. Sometimes a character fails an important role that, whatever the result of the role, the information gained needs to come back around at some point. Late revelation isn't something that's used very often. I think I've only used it once or twice. But the idea is that the character was close to figuring it out, but was missing some kind of key information. And just past the point that that information would have been critical to use, in a way that allows a character to suddenly gain information and move forward, late revelation fills in that blank space. So as an example, early on in one of my games, one player rolled a insight equivalent check about I prompted the roll and they failed super hard. And what they had a chance to learn was the hidden nature of a character. They were spending time around an archdevil, and they did not know it. And so months and months and months later in the real world, that revelation is about to come up. And it's been, years in game. So we're past the point of this being immediately helpful, but it's something that's still important for the characters to know going forward. But the Archdevil has already gotten one up on the players. So not very common does this come up, but it is helpful to keep track of, especially if you want to deliver a story beat to a character and the dice don't collaborate. Speaking of the dice not collaborating, swing. Each character has something called swing. And swing is a narrative mechanic. Swing is a good faith collaborative mechanic between the guide and the player that when the dice don't cooperate with our story, a player can use their swing to gain the most favorable outcome possible. Sometimes this is used when a player could not make a roll, but maybe this is an important plot point to move past. Or this success in this moment would change the nature of the story in one direction that is preferable to the player. The exchange is that when the player uses their swing, it comes back to the guide. And now the guide has the swing to use against that player when they succeed in a way that the guide doesn't want them to. Now, good faith and collaborative. When a player uses the swing, good faith interpretation of the roll. There is no monkey's paw, you say the thing and then I turn it against you. It's just good. And ideally, when a guide uses it, it is not to punish the player, but is used to help create a moment in the story. A player is arguing with an NPC who they care about, and they roll well enough to successfully convince them over to their side. But maybe it's more dramatic if that NPC doesn't listen. Maybe that would change the story in an interesting way. So the guide might swing, and we see where the story goes from there. Again, swing is not meant for the players and the guide to fuck each other over. It is meant to create more satisfying and interesting stories. And it's something that might not be right for every group. Not every GM or guide will use this mechanic in good faith. Now, collaboration. Another important aspect of this game. Players and characters should be able to collaborate in meaningful ways. And so there is a mechanic that represents that called collective action. Because we have all of these different mechanics that allow us to make D20 rolls plus dice, when characters are doing something together, rather than one character taking the lead and ascending their dice, one character takes the lead and rolls the D20, and then both characters add their dice to that D20. This allows characters to meaningfully work together. And if characters have a lot of story between them, they might have something called rapport. Rapport is the idea that characters can work well together. So when they take their collective actions, not only are they combining their dice, but they're actually ascending their dice. So characters doing things together is better than characters doing things alone. One of our role-playing consequences is called grief. And grief is like an injury, but it happens contextually and typically cannot be buffered. Grief is something that you interpret through the narrative. If a character takes a profound loss, like losing an NPC or another PC, maybe taking an injury that causes them to lose access to a skill, the guide and the player might briefly talk about the character gaining a grief. And the idea with grief is that this is a story beat that stays with the character. If I saw my best friend burned alive, if my house burnt down, I might be afraid of fire. And when I see fire or a lot of fire, that might affect me. And so mechanically, my dice would descend depending on how severe the grief is. And so again, in implied roleplay mechanics, something mechanical is happening that implies how a character should roleplay, that implies how a character should that implies how a player should roleplay the situation. If a player knows that their character is experiencing grief, that informs how they want to play the character. There is a mechanic called sentiments that helps ward off grief. So a character takes a grief, and then they have to gain some kind of sentiment, whether it be a connection with another character or player or whatever, or an object that helps ground them in these moments of grief. And that acts as a sort of future buffer, but it's also something that can be taken away from the character. So again, that implies roleplay around whatever this thing is. If I have a necklace that makes me feel safe around fire, every time fire comes up in a game, my character is going to grab that necklace and hold on to it tight. And I'm not going to feel that grief, but I'm still doing something. I'm still role-playing. Our last mechanic that I've fit in here is called luck. And luck is a fun little dice game that I came up with randomly in a session long ago playing a different TTRPG. And it's basically a gamble. There's two different kinds of luck. Instead of having a d20 roll, players are rolling 3d6. And when a player rolls these 3d6, so does the GM. And the player is looking for matches. The amount of matches they have in their dice depends. And the amount of matches they have in their dice determines how good their luck is. So no match is bad luck, not favorable interpretation of the roll. 1 match is mixed luck. 2 matches is good luck. 3 matches is perfect luck. So the idea of luck is that oftentimes characters will not have the ability to pull something off. I might not be very perceptive, but I could get lucky, so I might roll a luck check. Now, luck is not always consistent. There are high stakes and low stakes rolls. Where a high stakes roll, you need 2 matches or more for any kind of favorable outcome. And low stakes roll, you only need 1 match. If at any point you have 3 matches, which is extremely unlikely, it's like an extreme nat 20. The best possible thing that could happen happens. Almost a swing. It's more kind of luck, which is contested. Sometimes 2 opposing characters are doing something that requires luck. So in this case, there are 3 pools rolled. If it's an NPC versus a player, the player rolls, and then the guide rolls. And then each person makes a bet on how many matches they're going to get, not with each other. The guide holds off to roll a 3rd pool. So if a player has a 1, and a 6, they might say, I think I'm going to get 1 match. And if the guide has a 2, a 3, and a 4, they might say, I think I'm going to get 2 matches. And the guide rolls a 3rd pool. And the outcome of the luck is based on how good those guesses were. So if the pool rolls a 1, a 2, and a 6, the player who guessed 1 got 2 matches, and the guide who guessed 2 got 1 match. So each person is 1 guess off, and there is no favorable outcome. And you could decide to re-roll the pool. So you could decide the guide to re-roll the neutral pool, or the player and the guide could roll the active pools with the same guesses. There's honestly a bunch of different ways that you could interpret a draw, and it's up to what ultimately feels right. Okay, now to talk about engagements. No, we're not getting married. I'm so sorry. Engagements are when combat or something tense in which actions are being taken is happening. The foundation of an engagement is that everything happens at once. This idea enforces the behavior for the players that you can't just go around jumping into combats. It wants you to think about the consequences. If everything is happening at once, that means that each side has an equal chance of injuring each other and probably will injure each other. So we really have to think strategically before an engagement happens. We want to do things to avoid engagements altogether, or if we're going to get into one that we have the upper hand. So everything happens at once. There is an order in which the guide might resolve roles, just for the sake of having some semblance of order, but that doesn't mean that one thing precedes the other. So let's say we're getting into an engagement. The first thing that happens is movement. Once the characters realize that we're about to do violence upon each other, in the lead up to that violence, everything moves. So this becomes a negotiation between the guide and the players of where we can be. Each character has a different amount they can move, but NPCs might also be trying to cut you off. So a player can't just say, I take my movement over there. Because if a player starts moving over there, maybe an NPC is going to meet them, or maybe they're already going to meet them. So it becomes negotiation. Where is it reasonable for these characters to meet? Is there a strategy at play that is already influencing the moment? When an engagement begins, we are already resigned to consequences. The next thing that happens is opportunities. Opportunities are little situational jabs. So the most common one is holding a position. Let's say that I am waiting around a corner and someone comes into my sight line. The engagement has begun. They negotiate their movement. They don't know about me. I get to take an opportunity on that person coming into my sight line. So opportunities are our vector of strategy. If characters don't want to get injured, if they want to win without consequences or reduce their consequences, you should be looking for opportunities, again, before the combat starts. If someone is caught out in the open, someone else should be hiding. Look to use the terrain to your advantage. Is there a hill that you can hold to force someone to come up to you? Do you have a shield? And maybe you can use that shield to gain an opportunity because someone has to get over it and around it. Are the players at long range and the enemies have to move up to them? Maybe there's an opportunity to be gained with bows and arrows and holding positions. Once opportunities are resolved, the instance happens. The instance is when everyone takes our actions. Everything happens at once. There might be post-instance opportunities, and then, like a dramatic fight scene in a movie, the two sides come apart. So the instances within the engagements are like the structures of rounds. And after every instance, we have a check-in for a little scene. This is just a little narrative cherry on top. It does not need to be that deep, but it is a fun way for players to characterize in the middle of combat. So what this looks like in the game. Fight happens. One of our players saw this coming, so they were already hidden. They take an opportunity as movement is negotiated. Two sides come together. All of the actions are exchanged, injuries and whatnot. Maybe one character trips an enemy, so they have a post-instance opportunity as they're on their back. The two sides come apart, have a scene, maybe negotiate into ending the engagement. In a world and a mechanical system where injuries have real impact on how characters are able to function. If an enemy has just taken a major injury, they are probably not going to be in the mood to fight, if not capable of fighting. If the fight is not de-escalated, then rinse and repeat. Movement, opportunities, instance, post-instance opportunities, scene. So, almost lastly, let's talk about actions. Actions are the vessels through which we deliver our moves in the game. And actions break down into elements. So an action element is an aspect of what you can do. So in some other TTRPGs, you might have multiple actions or multiple attacks. Because of the amount of dice that you'll be rolling in Legacy and Saga, and especially at the higher levels, the game wants to reduce the amount of times you're rolling as much as possible. So one action elements. If I have 3 action elements, for me, that could mean that I am trying to injure someone as I try to trip them, and I'm also adding extra dice. The mechanics of what that means will be described way later in skill trees in a different video, but those are the 3 things: injury, trip, and extra dice. Now, an NPC might have abilities to respond to certain things, so buffers can stop those injuries. For the trip, we have something called contest. And a contest is any reasonable applicable dice. So if I have dice that represent my strength, let's say, and I am tripped, I might use my contest and roll those dice that represent my strength to stop myself from being tripped. Any NPC is going to have a standard contest, non-specified dice that just say this is what they can do. And that contest has to meet what's called a control target, or a target. And a control target is just the number you need to hit. The enemy rolls an enemy rolls a 15 total on their dice. That becomes the control target. You need to roll a 15 or more. Our final mechanic of the video. It's been 1 hour and 17 minutes and 34 seconds. Actually, 1 hour, 18 minutes, 15 seconds of recording. The video is part 1 is done. End of video.